Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hi, everyone. I am back today with one of my favorite guests, Dr. Jenn Salib-Huber. Hey, Jen.
Hey, Wendy, how's it going?
Good. So Jen's been on the podcast a couple of times, but not this season. So she was on the podcast. I think you've been on the podcast both in season 1 and season 2.
Yep.
And Dr. Jenn Salib-Huber is a registered dietitian, a naturopathic doctor, and an intuitive eating advocate. Jen provides health and hormone education to women in midlife without a side of diet culture, so they can make peace with food, aging, and hot flashes and find the confidence that they deserve in midlife. And Jen, I feel like you've been here. We've talked about a couple of different things over the last couple of years, but today we're going to talk about something that's actually really right now so relevant for me, which is how to make peace with your body in midlife.
Yeah.
So let's just maybe, there are going to be lots of people listening to this podcast now that weren't listening to it the last time you were on. So let's just maybe let people know a little bit about how we know each other and tell people where you are and how we know each other. Start with that.
Okay, so I'm in the Netherlands, but I am Canadian and I lived in Nova Scotia till 2019. We will be back in Nova Scotia. So I'm still consider myself like a transplanted blue noser, I guess, for lack of a better description. I'm trying to remember how, I think it's been like 10 years?
I would say
known each other?
I would say it's been at least 10 years.
How did we actually meet? I'm trying to remember. I remember having coffee. And then I remember we started kind of collaborating on stuff, but I don't know how we actually met.
Yeah, I actually have no idea how we met. I feel like maybe you reached out to me, but I don't know why or where that connection was. At some point I started working, Jen, I started working at your clinic, which was called Pillars of Health. I started working there doing food and, nutrition support for your patients. So I did that for a while. And then Jen and I ran ages and ages ago now, ran a course together.
7 years ago, maybe? I think it was like 7 years ago.
So long ago, but we did a course around menopause together, perimenopause.
Yep.
And then we just kind of stayed connected and stayed friends. And Jen, just so everyone is aware, Jen is also friends with the lovely Dr. Sarah Bailey, who is a regular guest on this podcast. Everyone loves Sarah, Jen.
I know. Every time you guys do a podcast, I make a cup of tea and I cuddle up on the couch and listen and pretend that I'm there.
Well, yesterday one dropped. I mean, this is yesterday in terms of the recording of this podcast, which will air way after this. But the one that dropped yesterday was actually one of my favorite conversations. We talked about parenting teenagers and the things that we've learned in that. And
I can't wait. It
was super fun. Okay. So tell me why you proposed this topic for today. Because I asked Jen what she wanted to talk about, and she said, let's talk about body image and sort of, this common frustration that women have as they enter perimenopause in their 40s and then onward into menopause, the frustration that women often have with their bodies. And I said, sure, let's talk about that. But tell me why this is top of mind for you right now.
Okay. So just to back up a little bit. So I, have been doing what I do now for, more than 20 years, meaning working in the field of nutrition. And for the last, I think about 7 or 8 years, I think it was right around or right after the time when you and I worked together, I really started moving into this kind of non-diet space, did some training around intuitive eating. And for the last probably 5 or 6 years, have been working exclusively with people to help them, what I call kind of undiet their life. So meaning how can we stop making all of your decisions about food and how you move your body, about losing weight, maintaining weight, changing weight. And every year, so every January for the last 5 years, I've run a little non-diet resolution challenge. This is always, or kind of some kind of support. You were part of that last year. It's usually some kind of, free support that is just trying to keep people out of the diet mentality. And this year I switched it up a little bit. And we're in the middle, because we're recording this in the first week of January, we're in the middle of this 7-day undieting challenge. And I asked people at the beginning of the challenge to pick a thought or belief or behavior that they wanted to undiet, meaning that they wanted to untangle from their relationship or uncouple from their relationship with food. And 90% of the answers were, I just want to feel better about my body. I don't want to diet anymore. I don't want to count and track and worry and think about food all the time. But my body has changed so much in midlife that I don't know what else to do. And I was really taken aback by how overwhelmingly this dominated and is dominating the conversations that we're having about it. Because I think you probably feel this in your work around like burnout and alcohol, that you kind of end up working in a bubble. Like when it is your day in, day out, it is how you live. It is like, the way that you live your life in a way that you no longer think about anymore. You kind of forget that there are people out there who aren't living a life where they're not thinking about their body all the time. Right. So even when I'm talking to people about nutrition and things like that, it doesn't always come up top of mind. So I thought that it might be a really good time to talk about it, because the beginning of the year is often a time when, talk about bodies is front and center again. And diet culture is there selling this shiny promise of lose weight, feel better in your body. But those two things aren't connected in the way that we've been led to believe. And what we think we know about how body weight is regulated is actually very different than what the mainstream messaging around weight loss is, which is weight is just a calorie in, calorie out equation, and you just have to find the right formula that works for you. The lifestyle change that will be effortless, and then it'll all come together and you'll live happily ever after.
Right.
But that's not the way it works.
Yeah. Well, do you want to start there? Because now I'm curious. Like, so, I have so many things I want to talk about, Jen, but this is definitely top of mind for me right now. And before we started, I can't put my knee up because you can see I'm still wearing my pajama
I was just going to say, I love those leggings, actually, whatever they are.
They're not leggings. They're pajama bottoms. We're recording this at 7. It's 7 a.m. my time because Jen's in The Hague. So anyway, I had to look great on top. Business on top, party on the bottom. So yeah, this is kind of top of mind for me right now. All of this stuff feels so relevant to me. As I was saying to Jen before we hit record, and this isn't something that I've updated the listeners on, I don't think recently, but they're all aware generally that I've been going through this sort of transition. I'm in menopause. I've been in menopause now for almost 2 years, full menopause, like past menopause for 2 years. And just trying to figure out how to feel good. It's been a real struggle for me. My hormones have been really kind of wild. And so I'm using hormone therapy and I have a doctor who's supporting me in that, and ended up in a situation in September where it turns out that actually my estrogen had just gone way too high. So way too far the other way. I'd been struggling with mood stuff, with weight gain, with sleep disruption, which was the major one for me. That's the one that really gets me. And so ended up on Sarah's advice going and getting my estrogen tested, my blood estrogen tested again. And it was just like through the roof. So now I'm in the process of trying to dial back the estrogen and find the right, so it's just been super duper frustrating. But part of that whole puzzle has been like the changes in my body that have happened in the last couple of years. And when I think back to where I was at the beginning of the pandemic, I just don't look anything like that anymore. And it's not just weight. And I don't know how much weight I've gained because I don't have a scale, which is one of the best decisions I ever made. I chucked it out 5 years ago. I haven't weighed myself for 5 years, but, I do know that my body has changed. I feel pretty confident I've gained weight. But also it's like where the weight is sitting, what my body shape is. And also what's the word for this? Like I'm going to say texture, but that's the wrong word. Like what it looks like and feels like my body is very different than what it looked and felt like before, in terms of skin changes, but also just like, it's just a weird feeling. And nothing's changed. So I still go to the gym 4 to 5 times a week. Most weeks I still eat really healthy food because that's how I like to eat. So I don't get, it's like, I get it from a rational perspective. I get it because I know this is what happens in midlife, but like my subconscious or whatever it is just not buying into it and it's still struggling with it. So I just wanted to share that. I think this conversation is going to be very personally relevant for me too, as someone who's just trying to like come to terms with this. And because there's nothing I would like more than to never think of this again. Like, I just don't want to think about this. And I would say I'm probably doing a better job than many women are around it, just because of everything I know about all of this, and I have a better level of acceptance, I think, than probably a lot of people do. But geez, it's frustrating, Jen. It's tough.
It is. It totally is. And I think that anybody listening who is in midlife or beyond will be able to relate to what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually a really good conversation for us to have, because one of the things, and I think you probably do this with your alcohol coaching too, is that it's not necessarily about changing the desire, right? In that you will, even people who feel like they've got this whole body image thing sorted out, you will still have bad body image days. Right. You will still have days where you don't like what you see in the mirror, your clothes don't fit the way that you want them to, or you need to change your clothes.
Right.
So the goal is never to make that feeling go away. And I think that that's a safer place for people to start this discussion, because it can feel impossible. The goal is to change how you respond to those feelings. The goal is to develop some resiliency and some flexibility and some cushioning so that you don't feel like you're jumping off a cliff and crash landing every time this happens. Because over the course of our lifetime, if we're lucky enough to live, 80, 90, 100 years, our bodies are going to change 1,000 different ways that have nothing to do with things that we can control.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Should we come back to the resiliency piece and start with, like, what if we go back to how your body weight is regulated, the way your body weight is regulated, is different from what we know. And then come back to this, like how we create that resiliency. So the problem, because it's really the problem, the first part of it, right, is the fact that our body weight isn't what we're being told about how we can regulate our body weight is just not, it's not accurate.
So what we're being told is a very narrow definition of how body weight regulation actually happens. And so what you said just a few minutes ago, I'm still exercising every day, I'm still eating well because that's what I enjoy. Those things haven't changed. Why isn't it working anymore?
Yeah.
I have heard literally thousands of times.
Sure.
And it's because that's part of the cultural programming, that those are the two most important pieces. And if you can sort those out, you can figure it out.
Yeah.
But weight regulation is much more complex than that. A large percentage of it, I would say the majority, is likely to be genetically influenced.
Right.
So we know this from twin studies. There are lots and lots of twin studies of identical twins separated at birth, which still kind of blows my mind that there's enough of these people, these pairs, that we can actually have enough data to generalize the findings. Like, that's kind of wild. Anybody who understands research will be like, whoa,
wow,
there's actually so many twins, identical twins separated at birth, reunited in adulthood, that we can say that, 70, 65, if you want to be conservative, 70% of what we look like on the inside and the outside is genetically influenced. And I say influence instead of determined, because we know that genetics aren't 100% going to get you to the same place every time, but they are driving the bus.
Right.
Meaning that your metabolism, the percentage of body fat that your body is trying to maintain, i.e. your set point, the type of muscle you have, how much of it, how easy it is for you to build, maintain, lose, where we distribute fat on our body, all of that is genetically influenced.
Yeah.
So when we start to kind of think about that, we can see examples in our life of people that we've always kind of labeled as lucky because they have a fast metabolism that generally stays with them through most of their life, or at least most of their adult life. Mm-hmm. We extend the genetic explanation to them, but we don't extend the genetic explanation to people who live in larger bodies. We
Oh, that's
blame
so interesting and so
diet and
true. I'd
lifestyle.
never thought of it that way. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
People who build muscle really easily. We have examples all the time of people who are genetically gifted at certain types of muscle, right? Think of long distance runners versus bodybuilders,
Right.
different kinds of muscle.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for one to become the other.
Mm-hmm.
So when we start to understand that, okay, so this really narrow range, we're going to call it BMI because that's what they call it, but this narrow range of what people should weigh to be healthy, to be all the things, is based on generally white young men from more than a century ago that was never meant to be generalized to people from all different backgrounds, cultural and otherwise, women in menopause.
Right.
So this frame of reference is really narrow. It's based on a really narrow, misunderstood understanding of how weight is regulated, because if let's call it 70% is genetically influenced, well, what makes up the other 30? Sure, diet, movement fall into that, but so do hormones, like you've experienced, sleep, stress, environmental things that we can't control.
Yeah.
And so when we start to back up a little bit and say, okay, well, I can kind of see now that all of these things aren't, there's a reason why, even though I haven't changed how I eat and how I move my body is changing. I think it takes some of the urgency out of the feeling of, oh my God, I feel like this is a runaway train and I have to stop it right now, so that we can press pause, which is that first really important step in getting out of the diet cycle, is recognizing what triggers the desire for weight loss and the desire to change your body, and how do we press pause and start to change how we respond, which is the resiliency piece.
Yeah, I love that. As you were talking, I was thinking, it's like Sarah always says to me, sleep's the most important thing. So sleep, she's like, if you don't sleep, then your hormones are never going to be able to sort themselves out. You're always going to be tired. And as you're talking, I'm thinking like, it's, the not sleeping for me, which is definitely hormonally driven, and which I do all of the right things around. So I do all the work around it, I untechnology myself early in the night. I have a wind down routine. My bed is cold. I'm doing all of the stuff. That piece of it, if I don't sleep well, is going to impact my hormones. It's going to increase my cortisol. It's going to contribute to me feeling like crap the next day, which is going to lead to more stress for me, because I'm going to be trying to I'm going to feel like I'm trying to get through the day sleep deprived. And that's just going to contribute to this whole weight issue, all of it. Like, it's all connected. And so if I could figure out how to really undiet all of that and just focus in on sleep.
But here's the other thing though, because here's the other piece of that conversation is undieting the belief that our bodies aren't going to change. Right. So we know that 80% of women in midlife experience weight gain.
Right.
The change in hormones that we go through, and hormone replacement generally doesn't aim to restore your levels to premenopausal levels.
No.
It's meant to just like take the edge off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the change in hormones that we go through, whether we're on HRT or not, lead to a redistribution of assets, right? Meaning that weight shifts and moves. So even if the scale isn't moving or isn't moving much, your clothes are going to fit differently.
Sure.
What you see in the mirror is going to look differently. And for a lot of people, it does feel like it happens overnight. I get panicked messages all the time from people saying like, oh my God, I just woke up and I don't even know who I'm seeing in the mirror.
Yeah.
And part of it is the cultural kind of programming that we have around aging and women's bodies in particular, that what we look like at 18 is the pinnacle, and that we should spend the rest of our life trying to maintain that. Yeah. And women have not been given the grace to age that men historically have. That's changing as well. But so much of our self-esteem and self-image, as we've been told, is about how we look.
Right.
So when your body image is driving your self-esteem bus, is how I describe it. If you have a bad body day, your whole self-esteem gets derailed and goes off the road. So developing the flexibility and the resiliency is around saying, like, I'm a pretty damn awesome 40, 50, 60 something woman, and I'm not letting my body image drive my self-esteem bus anymore. So if my body changes, my body changes. And I'm just going to keep doing what feels good and what helps me feel good in my body. I'm going to work with it so that we're on the same team. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life fighting it. That's a big part of the resilience.
Yeah. That's really hard to do. And so I want to talk about like how we actually do that, because I get that intuitively. Like it makes total sense to me, but it is a really hard thing to do. And I'm wondering, like, if the first step in it for someone like me isn't to start practicing self-compassion around the fact that I can't actually do this yet. Because part of me, as someone who works in the field of wellness and balance and who, is well aware of the power of our thoughts and totally believes in human brain's ability to change and, all of it, is like, why do you still feel this way? Why is your brain still thinking this way when you know everything that you know, and you believe, like, I really do believe diets are garbage. Like I believe all, I don't, subscribe to any of that stuff, but I still have these thoughts. They still come up where it's like, you have to, and I like this, the whole, like, taking the panic out of it piece, because I think that's really important. Like, I've been really trying to lean into the idea that this is a period in time that I'm going through, as opposed to like a predictor of like a future trend kind of thing. But it's just like, this is a period of time I'm going through. It feels very turbulent and out of my control and unpredictable right now. At some point this will level off and I'll just feel a little more level about all of it. So I've been trying to kind of lean into that and like not spend too much time worrying about all of it, but it's really hard. And I think one of the biggest things that I do that's not serving me is I judge myself for having the thoughts about body image, right? I'm like, you shouldn't be thinking this way. You know better. Like, you know better than to be criticizing your own body. You know how awful that is for women. You know how, like, I know all of it. So that's the part, as you're talking, I'm thinking, this is my first step, is figuring out how to give myself that same self-compassion that I promote when I'm, supporting women around changing their habits with alcohol, or, learning how to do less and set boundaries. I'm always like, have self-compassion for the fact that this is going to take time, and that these things are so deeply programmed in your brain. It's not your fault. It's the way it is. And so that for me, it was the light bulb as you were talking there. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to say it's the hardest part, because I think that for some people it's actually easier. For some people, they've never been given even the idea that they could have permission to accept their body as it is, because they've always been told that they have to work towards losing weight, making it smaller, those kinds of things.
Right.
But I think that when we can intellectually know it, right? Like you're saying, like, I know this. I think it's sometimes helpful to explore some of those, those deeper beliefs around bodies. And so body neutrality, have we talked about body neutrality, or have you heard of the term body neutrality before?
I don't think so. But even if we have, let's talk about it again.
So I love body neutrality actually more so than body positivity or body acceptance, because body positivity is saying, gives people the impression that we should get to a place where we like and love every part of our body every day.
Right.
That's completely unrealistic. Just like we would tell someone with depression that the goal is to be happy all the time. Right. It's not. It's to have more good days and bad days, and to have the tools and support and flexibility and resiliency when you're having an off day. So body neutrality is a kind of a safer place to land, because it's saying, I'm going to learn to give credit to the parts of me that aren't my body, and to give them a seat on that self-esteem bus more often.
Yeah.
So that the importance I place on not just my body, but other bodies just starts to take more and more of a backseat.
So how do we do that, Jenn? Like, how do I get these things, these parts of me on the bus?
Yeah.
I mean, I think they are on the bus for me. I want to be clear. I think they're definitely on the bus. I definitely have there are lots of things that I'm very confident about and feel really great about in terms of things that I'm able to do and offer. But I would say that sometimes they're in the back seat. So
Yeah,
like, how do I get them? How do I get them up at the front?
And this is always where, like, it sounds like I'm sitting on the fence with an answer, but I'm not, because there isn't a path there. This isn't a 7-step process.
Okay.
It is examining core beliefs about bodies. So, do you, like, people often say, I want to get to a place where I have the same kind of body acceptance for myself that I have of others. And yet I can't get there myself. And then you still need to continue to work on the body acceptance of other bodies.
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
That there's a really great podcast. I feel like I recommend this at least once or twice a week, with Brené Brown and Sonia Renee Taylor. And Sonia Renee Taylor is an author. She wrote the book, The Body's Not an Apology. And she talks to Brené, who herself isn't, I would say, aligned in the anti-diet space. She definitely has talked about her diety moments. But she talks to her about how we need to work on body acceptance as a social justice kind of movement, and that we need to dismantle the rungs on the ladder together in order to really get to a place where we're not valuing smaller bodies.
Right.
So body acceptance isn't just about liking and loving yourself. It's about not assigning value to smaller bodies and worth. That's not a 7-step process. And depending on your background, how you were raised, what you were exposed to in terms of body shaming and fat shaming, what you may still be being exposed to. Sometimes there's a lot of work, but sometimes it really is just recognizing that there is another reality that exists where you can be happy, healthy, supporting your health with healthy behaviors and habits in a way that allows you to live a long and happy life without pursuing a smaller body.
Yeah.
And that is, that's my work in a nutshell, really, I guess, if I had to, drive it down. But that's where the flexibility becomes intuitive, when you no longer panic or get a feeling of panic if and when your body changes, because your body will change. It's going to change sometimes, for reasons we can't control, sometimes for reasons we maybe could. But either way, if we can detach it from worth, then it takes a permanent backseat on that self-esteem bus if it's no longer connected to our worth.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. That really does resonate with me. And I can see, as you're talking, I'm like trying to be kinder to myself, because I do think I've actually made a lot of progress and even in terms of the panic thing. I'm not a person I'm never the person who's like, oh, yesterday was like, oh, I feel terrible this morning, and yesterday was like a wild day of eating, so today I'm just going to like eat nothing. I mean, that is just so not part of my life anymore. And it was for a long time, like always reacting.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Totally. Like, right. I'm talking from experience here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This was, almost 30 years of my life.
Yeah. Well, this is why I love having you on, Jen, because you and I are both like pretty honest and real about why we do the work that we do. I mean, everything you're talking about the diet culture is something that, as much as I rationally and intuitively did not want to buy into, as a woman in North America, I bought into it. And I'm thinking, as you're talking about, disassociating value, size, and like just disconnecting size and worth, and working on that within ourselves, I'm thinking, like, how do you control though these things that happen where someone says something is just so insensitive to you about something? Like, I'm thinking, like, me and my sister, for example, again, you talk about the genetics, and you have this really cool story about meeting your biological sibling and how similar your body types were, even though you grew up in completely different places and environments. And my sister and I kind of have a different thing, in that my sister's quite a bit taller than me, and she's always been very, very physically small, like thin. And people comment on it. And it just, I internalize it every single time as somehow a comment on my relative value. Yeah. And you can't control that. I can't control what other people say or do. So, it's complicated by the fact that this is socially at least in North America and Western civilized Western countries, I guess it's very much like a common mindset, this size and worth thing, right? So you have all of this other messaging outside of you that's saying something completely different from the thing that you want to start accepting.
So body diversity is something that we have not incorporated into our cultural norms. But that's a relatively, I don't want to say it's recent, but I use this example that when we first moved here to The Hague and I went to the Mauritshuis Museum, which, is full of the Dutch masters and 16th, 17th century paintings. And every single woman in these hundreds of paintings is softer and rounder and larger than we would ever see depicted in the media today.
I know, it's like you and I were posing as models. That's what I always think when I see them. I'm like, oh my God, that's me.
So I remember talking to someone about this at the beginning, because I joke that if anybody wants to scroll back 3.5 years in my Instagram, you can find the picture that I posted from the museum saying, like, look at this body diversity. And somebody either in my messages or on that post said, who knows much more about art than I do, said, yeah, and you don't want to know what the really cool thing is that was considered the standard of beauty. So even if the women being painted didn't look that way, they would have told the artist to paint them that way.
Wow. Isn't that cool? Yeah.
So this whole idea of, body diversity not being represented is part of the problem. And if we think back to other times when diversity was not part of our cultural norms, like, imagine commenting on someone's skin color in 2023.
Yeah.
We wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Imagine telling a family with 5 girls, it's a shame you didn't have a boy in 2023. We wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I really, really hope we get to a point at some point when the cultural norm of commenting on people's bodies is erased from our default programming. But I call it out now. Thankfully, it doesn't actually happen all that often, but part of the coaching that I do is often around helping people manage those conversations. And we come up with some pretty witty answers like, my body's not a TripAdvisor review, no opinions needed.
Yeah.
Like things that can really just call into question how ridiculous it is to compare and comment on people's bodies.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So can you give us like a couple of, like, for people who are listening / me, can you give us a couple of like things we could start, just steps, like practical steps? This obviously, I hear you. It's not something that's going to, obviously it's a big deal and it's a deeply ingrained mindset and set of beliefs for a lot of us. So how do we start? Like, what are a couple things we could start with?
Yeah. So the first is when you have a bad body thought, which, I like to call them out and label them. That's the, oh my God, what is this? What am I looking at? Why are my clothes fitting this way?
Yeah.
To recognize that it's the thought that you're uncomfortable with. It's not the body.
Right.
And from there, have a toolbox of things that can help move you through that. So I always tell people that trying to think your way out of a bad body thought is the perfect way to go down the rabbit hole, right? But if you can put yourself back into your body, so thinking about your body is thinking about your body. The thought is about your body.
Right.
But if you can do something to move your way through it, which movement is my favorite thing, whether it's a walk, whether it's, anything, gardening, whatever, just get back in your body, move, do something that feels good while you're doing it. It will help to soften the blow. It will help you to come out of that fight or flight response that I really do think gets triggered every time, especially if you're in that like lather, rinse, repeat cycle of bad body thoughts, that it really triggers that fight or flight and it's panic, right? So if you have a way to say like, okay, this is a thought. I'm not going to try and think my way out of this thought because that's actually putting me into my, thinking about my body more. I'm going to try and match my mood to my movement. So this is one of the ways that I teach people to incorporate intuitive movement. So if I'm not feeling confident in my body, the best way for me to build confidence is to pick up my kettlebell or to do some kind of strength training. It is impossible for me to feel bad in my body when I'm working out. It's just impossible.
Right.
if I'm feeling really stressed, because often there's actually things that are happening outside of us that we can't control. And our default is to like look inwards, which is when we often start to think of, bad thoughts about our body. Will be like, maybe I need to do some yoga to unwind.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I need some fun. Maybe I need to like dance. So really trying to figure out, having that toolbox of these are the things that almost always feel good while I'm doing them.
Right.
And being able to reach for those in those moments, and then just starting to notice the patterns. So does this happen when I'm around certain people? Does this happen if you're still having a cycle? Is this still happening at certain times of the month?
Right.
So the other really interesting thing about perimenopause is that we know from the research that there's another peak of body dissatisfaction that happens when women are going through perimenopause. And we think that it's actually triggered by the changes in our brain due to the changes in estrogen and progesterone. So the first peak of body dissatisfaction happens in puberty,
right?
And perimenopause is reverse puberty. And so I think that just knowing that, sometimes that whole knowledge is power thing, just saying like, okay, perimenopause has really changed a lot of things for me, maybe including how I feel about my body.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, because when I think back to the body dissatisfaction, like, it's actually comforting to me, because when I think back to the body dissatisfaction that happened for me in puberty, which at the time felt so real, like I felt so horrible about my body when I changed from being like, a girl to a young woman, and just the changes that come along with that. I remember feeling very, very self-critical of that and not feeling good about it. You and I've talked about that, like seeing yourself in a bathing suit, like that whole thing, after your body's changed. But now I look back on that and I'm like, man, you were just smoking. I feel so good about myself when I was an adolescent. And so that the reason why this gives me some comfort is that I wonder if in 10 years, I'll look back on this time and I'll say, you look freaking fantastic. Yeah, probably. Right. And the reason I'm saying that is because it was all in my brain. It wasn't real. It felt so real, and it consumed that dysmorphia that I had, just felt so real. And now I look back and I just appreciate myself. And do have like a lot of love and self-compassion for that kid who spent a lot of time torturing herself,
and that's I think an example that everyone can relate to, of looking back at a picture from another time and thinking like, oh my God, I remember being so self-critical in that moment, but why?
Yeah.
And it's such a great reminder that, weight loss won't protect us from those bad body thoughts.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, because that's another piece that I think is really important. So tell me why, listen, I'm not even going to ask the question. Talk about that. The question would be dumb. The question would have been dumb if I'd asked it. You go ahead. Just tell us why.
Well, a lot of times I think people are starting to see that diets don't work, quote unquote, or that we don't necessarily need to follow a diet to be healthy. I think people can start to see that. But one of the big kind of obstacles that they run up on is, okay, fine, but I remember feeling better about my body when it was smaller. So how can I not pursue that? That's my goal, is to get to a place where I feel good. And I actually just recently had a guest on my podcast, Christina Bruce, who's a body image coach. And we talked about this a lot, about this whole kind of fallacy around, believing that it's a weight or a number that drives the body confidence. But most people will actually realize that when they get there, that they're more focused on their body, not less focused.
Yeah.
And that you will still have bad body thoughts and bad body days, regardless of your size, your weight, your shape, whatever it is. Sure. And so, being able to separate out getting to a number or fitting into my clothes, sure, might give you a moment of like, ooh, look at that, I can fit into these jeans again. But it's not going to give you the confidence that you're actually after, which is being able to feel good in your skin most of the time, regardless of whether your jeans fit. That's weight loss will give that to you.
Yeah, I totally get it. I 100% buy into that. I mean, since I ditched that scale, and just started trusting myself, and trusting my body, which I, to be honest, don't really feel like I can trust my body right now. I think that's part of it. I'm like, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what's happening. So I feel like I don't have that confidence that my body's going to do what it usually will do. But of course, there's a good reason for that. As we've talked about, it's not going to do what it has always done because things have changed. But I just spend so much less time in a place of criticism. So even though we're talking about how I'm, have had this recent struggle with this, it's nothing like it would have been, Jen, if I was stepping on the scale every day. Oh my God, God help me. If that scale had been holy, this would have just been I'm just imagining the women out there going through exactly what I'm going through, but who are still weighing themselves all the time, because we've talked about this on the podcast before, just how that, stepping on the scale. I always used to say when I was doing food coaching, it's nothing more than the measurement of the Earth's gravitational pull on your body at that particular moment in time, trying to disconnect the worth and the value piece from it. But I wasn't doing that. I'd step on the scale and I'd be like, this means that I have failed, or this means that I have succeeded. But it was always one of those two things. It was never, this means I'm A-okay, right? It was one extreme or the other every time I stepped on that scale. So thank God that's gone for me, because I can just imagine how much worse this would all be.
There's only two reasons people step on the scale.
Yeah.
And that's because they think that they have lost weight and they're looking to validate that.
Yeah.
They think they've gained weight and they're looking for motivation to punish themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
And no good can ever come of that.
No.
And it's a false prophet, because there are so many different things that influence your weight from minute to minute, basically.
Yeah.
And if you're not making decisions based on real information, then the outcome is never going to be guaranteed, right? Yeah. So if you're making all your decisions based on what the scale is saying, you're really just throwing yourself into, like a carnival ride of outcomes. Because you can't control it in the way that it's been led to believe, without it significantly impacting the way you feel in your body and how you live your life. Yeah. The trade-off is, if you have to micromanage every bite of food and count every calorie and maintain that really narrow window to keep your weight within a certain range, it is not going to be fun to live in that body.
Oh my God. It's fun to live in that body. I mean, I've sort of lived in that body, but not to the extreme that some of the women I've worked with live in that body. Yeah.
I was in that extreme
for
years.
Yeah.
And, I was the person who would get on the scale 3 or 4 times a day.
Oh, wow.
Like I didn't do anything in the morning other than poop if I could, because that would be even better before getting on the scale. Right. And it really set the tone for everything I did. Every decision for the rest of my day was influenced by the number on the scale.
I know. Isn't that nuts? Wow.
Hell on earth.
Horrible, horrible, horrible. It's so freeing for me. Freeing for me is like not, I describe it this way. I think I said this maybe the last time we talked about this, Jen, but just for anyone who hasn't heard you and I chat before, I think that there was such an incredible freedom and level of confidence that came from ditching alcohol. I just felt so good every single day, like just so fabulous. I hadn't felt that good in so long. And it's not to say that there weren't super hard parts about it. So much of it was hard, but overall it felt so amazing that I just could not bring myself to step on that scale, because I knew there was at least a 50% chance it was going to make me feel shitty and ruin my vibe. And I just couldn't do it. So for that first 30 days of my very first alcohol experiment 5 years ago, I just thought, don't do it. Like, just stay away from that thing for 30 days. Plus, I did buy into the very, very good advice, which is just focus in on one thing. So I was just focusing in on the alcohol piece, and I didn't want to, muddy the waters with anything else. But really it was about, I am not willing to let this inanimate object steal this joy that I have created for myself. And I've never regretted that decision. And I like I said, I can feel how different all of this would be for me right now if I was still doing that daily, because it was almost daily for me. I can just feel how different that would be. And the thing is, and this is the piece that for me, I want to say, and I'd love to know what you think about this and hear your like expert thoughts on this, but it hasn't changed the outcome, people. So not getting on the scale for 5 years hasn't changed anything. I believe I would be actually, I'd probably be in a far worse situation, because what would have happened is I'd be beating myself up every second day that I didn't lose 0.1 or whatever, which would have led to me feeling like a complete failure, and then just throwing it all to the wind and, overeating that day and paying no attention and not doing the things that actually make me feel good when it comes to how I eat. I would have ditched all of that. Instead, I'm not getting that messaging, either the positive messaging or the negative messaging, on a daily basis. And I'm just left to make the choices that actually feel like the right ones for me that day, which is really, I think, what intuitive eating is all about. But I just want to say to people, like, I feel very, very confident. I'd be I don't know how I'm maybe 5 pounds up. Am I 10 pounds up? I have no idea, because I don't have a scale, but I feel as though the scale, the weighing it certainly wouldn't have made me gain less weight. If anything, I would have gained more weight than I have going through this transition in life. Does that feel accurate from an expert kind of?
Yeah. I mean, there are 2 pieces to that. One is that if the size and shape of your body is one that you can only maintain in restriction, when you stop restricting and weighing, sometimes it does go up. Yeah. And, I think that that's something to talk about, because a lot of people have some of that experience, but their diet culture programming tells them, like, well, clearly intuitive eating doesn't work. Look, you gained weight. You better stop and go right back to dieting. But you have to remember that if that's not where your genetics are programming you to want to be, set range, set point, whatever you want to call it, that may change. But most people, I was one of them as well, when I stopped dieting and when I started eating intuitively, being able to listen and respond to my hunger and fullness cues, and felt like it was like a give and take relationship, my weight stabilized.
Right.
With some perimenopausal changes for sure, but certainly not the ups and downs that I was living for 25 years before that.
Right.
And that tends to be what happens, because the scale is an attunement disruptor. So in intuitive eating, we talk about like learning to listen to hunger and fullness, but in order to be able to do that, you have to be able to tune out the attunement disruptors. The scale is one, your calorie counter is one, the rings on your Apple Watch that are beeping at you to close them is another one. All of the shoulds that come in, like all of those are attunement disruptors that get in the way of learning to listen and trust your body. But when you stop using the scale as the be all and end all and start listening to what your body is telling you, I'm hungry, I need to eat, I feel full and satisfied, we can stop now, then it stabilizes for most people.
Yeah. And also, I think it was a source of daily cortisol for me, in that it would stress me out. Right. And of course, we know that too much cortisol can contribute to weight gain, or making it more challenging to lose weight or whatever. So that's gone too. As much as I'm talking today about how my body weight has changed, I'm not spending my hours thinking about the fact that my body's changed. Like, it's barely part of my brain, part of my day. I am having moments occasionally, like you're talking about. And I think the key for me is to have more self-compassion in those moments. And I love this idea of recognizing that it's a thought and then moving my way through the thought and trying to do something, and it's very similar to what I talk about in relation to drinking cravings, which is, what is it I really need in this moment?
Yes, I say that all the time. That is absolutely the first thing when we're talking about that self-care is, what do I, with emotional eating in particular, what is it that I actually need this moment?
Right. And I think that the criticism, that sort of body self-shaming that we do of our bodies, is often an emotional response. So it is connected to a feeling that we might say or identify or define as sort of a negative emotion. And so it very often is the case that we actually are needing something in that moment, and it's coming out as, the expression of the emotion is coming out as body dissatisfaction. And that if we were feeling amazing and we looked at ourselves in exactly the same outfit and in exactly the same moment, we might think we look like all that, right? Like, so actually asking, what is it that I really need in that moment? And, of course, for many of us, it is exercise, getting outside, talking to a friend, doing something fun, getting a break, taking a break. Rest. Exactly. Like taking a meaningful break. I mean, that is, like, I would say 90% of the time around alcohol, what women need. instead of a glass of wine. Like, I need a meaningful break, which means something that feels good, that takes you away from all of your obligations and responsibilities. Yeah. Okay. So that's one thing we can do, is start moving our way through it. Any other little suggestions or thoughts for people?
I think that having an understanding of body positivity, body acceptance, body neutrality, and the difference between them, and body image can also help to frame, what is it that you're actually working on? Is it that you're trying to feel more positive about your body? Then maybe even those, kind of affirmations, like, putting the sticky notes on, like reminding yourself that, your body is good and worthy. Like, sometimes it's the body positivity piece. Like, if there's a lot of negative self-talk, then those simple things, we know affirmations work. How we talk to ourselves does help to change our programming. But if it's that core belief that smaller bodies are better bodies, then it's more, I think, on the social justice piece of body acceptance, and like, okay, where has my programming about bodies come from? And is it actually true? Can really help to expand that. So, diversifying your feed is actually one of my favorite things. So, in my groups, I have, resources for people to follow and things like that. And like, really start to challenge your beliefs about bigger bodies. Like, can bigger bodies really not do the things that I want to do? So that you're not waiting to arrive in a smaller body to start living your life. Because that's what I see all the time, is people are saying, well, when I lose weight, when I do this, or they'll really hinge like everything on, well, I can't do this because my body doesn't look the part, or doesn't, look the way I want it to. But working on body neutrality, meaning like, how can I value the pieces of me more? How can I see? And one kind of quick question, which is sometimes funny and a little bit morbid, but I think really drives home the point, is, when you die, what are people going to remember about you?
Yeah.
It is not going to be your weight or your dress size.
It's not going to be that you gained 5 pounds in menopause.
No. Right. So if you need a reminder of what others see value in and what you should value, start to think about, what they're going to say when you die. So, but I think a lot of it is a continual reframing. There's like series of tiny experiments of like, okay, this has been my default programming up until now, and it's not worked, because, hey, look at that. I'm halfway through my life and I'm still shitting on my body when my clothes don't fit. Right. So how do I change it? And some of it is a big change. Some of it is a lot of little changes. And often it's a combination of both.
Yeah, totally agree. I also think we have to, and this has been really helpful for me, to be honest, like the gym that I go to, is a wonderful gym, and it's all people, all levels of athletic ability, all ages, all shapes and sizes. And that's really great. Like, I love working out at that gym. So, and, I think there are probably other places I could work out where that's not so much the case, but there I'm just normal. Everyone's normal. Doesn't matter what they look like, and it's given me it makes it so easy for me to appreciate what you're talking about. The fact that bodies of different sizes are capable of doing like pretty phenomenal things. And I, have people that I look up to at that gym who are doing things that I can't do yet. And their bodies are very different from my body, but they're not necessarily the tiny body that I used to, consciously work to be. And that's really cool. And then I think the same thing, there's been a shift. I feel like I'm actually further along than I'm giving myself credit for.
I think you are too.
Like, when I go places, like I'm going on a vacation with my husband in January that I'm really looking forward to. And it hasn't been like, oh, before I go on this vacation, I need to lose like 15. Like, I'm not in that mode at all with the weight. And instead, when I go away now, I tend to just like notice that I just look like everyone else on the pool deck, right? Like not everyone else, but every other woman who's 50, like we all, this is the body shape and the body. I still can't think of the word for it, but like what would you call the fact that your skin changes, the texture, the texture, kind of the composition, I guess, like
totally does
what a body in midlife looks like. I'm just much more appreciative of that and noticing of that, instead of noticing the 2% of people at the pool who look, the way maybe we would conventionally and from a societal perspective define as being sort of beautiful and like perfect and all the rest of it.
It's funny that you mentioned 2% because I've heard the statistic. I actually haven't looked up the reference, but that what we see represented in the media, it represents 5% of the diversity of human bodies.
Right. That feels right to me.
Me too.
Yeah. Just from looking around. Yeah.
What you have assumed is the ideal is actually the minority, not you as in you, but like what we as a people. Yeah. And I think so just recognizing that. And I mean, anybody who's been lucky enough to travel and see different parts of the world will see that, that, this thin white ideal is, has racist roots, has classist roots, and is not representative of the diversity on this planet.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And then just to finish this off, we both have daughters. Yeah. And it's not just a female issue, actually. I don't even want to say that because I have a son and you have a son, and I see this play out I see this play out with boys and girls as they grow up, this body image issue. So just comment on how important this is from a generational perspective for us to work on this, to try to break the cycle. For any moms who are out there listening, thinking like they're not quite ready to focus in on this yet. I always feel like this is another motivator for me. Like it's been such a big piece of me re-examining my own relationship with food and my own body image and how I talk about food and how I see other people. Like it's very connected to trying to mother in a way that helps my kids not be shackled to the number on the scale or what their body looks like. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I think it's Maya Angelou who said, when you know better, you do better. Yeah. And I know that for so many of the women that I work with who are mothers of sons or daughters, it is a big part of their motivation because so many of us grew up in homes where dieting was really, in its heyday, right? So people who were born in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, grew up with parents who were very entrenched in diet culture, ranging from low fat to low carb. And even when it wasn't being directly applied to their kids, when I do kind of part of my intake and I ask people to fill out, some forms and answer questions about their family's food rules, the number of times people will say, we didn't have sugar in the house. We only had dessert on Sunday and could only have one piece. And my mom never had any, or my dad was always on a diet, or, so really changing the default conversations that your family and your home has around food and bodies will literally help to change the next generation.
Yeah.
So if you get out of the habit of commenting on your body and other people's bodies, it will not become part of the conversations that your children default to. And that's how we really affect change, is by changing things that are part of that cultural default programming. And unfortunately, like we were talking about earlier, commenting on bodies, good or bad, is often still part of family discussions. We just came through the holidays, and how many people will say to me, oh my goodness, I barely survived this family dinner where they were commenting on cousin so-and-so and how much weight she had lost or gained, or, why do we do that? So yes,
I don't know.
If you have kids and you want the world to be a better place when it comes to body diversity and acceptance, start with yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's okay to say to as of one particular relative for whom this is like a constant, it's in every conversation, is how there are three women. We've got three women, got my sister, me, and my mom. And like the weight thing, for whatever reason, it's always there for this person. And it just drives me bonkers to the point where I've said, let's not talk about weight in front of my kids, please. Like, I don't want to talk about weight. Like, but yeah, I hear you on that. And I think it is it's possible to break this cycle. And it's something that I feel very grateful to have had the experience I had of being of an unhealthy diet mentality, and then having gone the path I went after my first burnout and going into learning about natural nutrition and meeting you and having all these conversations and having the ability to work through a lot of these things myself before my kids got to an age where I think it had it's always, no matter how young they are, I guess they're watching and seeing what you're doing. But for me, I feel like I changed this really, really early when my kids were young, and I've been really, really conscious around it. And I feel very, very grateful for that. And I have not been perfect, but I think I've been I've done it in a very, very different way than the house. And this is not being critical of my parents, but my parents were of that generation. My dad was always on a diet. There was a Weight Watchers booklet on our counter constantly. I don't remember it not being there.
And even one practical thing that parents can start doing now is stop calling food good or bad.
Yeah.
Right. Don't say like, we're eating healthy tonight.
Yeah.
Don't say we're being bad and ordering takeout.
Yeah.
Even just changing that language can help to shape a healthier relationship with food.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Okay, well, this has been an awesome conversation, Jenn. Do you have something going on that you want to share? So you want to talk about your program that's going on?
Yeah. So, there's a couple of different ways that I like to work with people. So I have some limited one-to-ones because of where I live. The time zone makes it differently. My group program, which will probably be full by the time that this airs, but will run again in September, is really like that, the intensive 12 weeks of undieting for people who really want to work through this kind of step by step. But I have a membership community, which is, tied to my podcast, the Midlife Feast community, which is really just providing that support and safe space for people to explore intuitive eating and nutrition, because those things are important. But there's tons of support there. There's a module on body image. There's, some body image challenges that happen. So for people who are looking for some support and some community, that is open, and I would love to welcome people into that. We've got a really great group there already who's been there since it launched in October. It's a great place for people who want to learn about it.
And so how do people find that?
So the best place is to go to menopausenutritionist.ca. So that's my website. You can find links to all those things. And obviously on Instagram, which is where I hang out the most, you can find a link in my bio with usually links to all the things that I've got going on.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'll share that in the show notes, Jenn. Appreciate that. Always love talking to you. I have some new things to think about as I go forward. I'm feeling more self-compassion for myself at the end of this episode than I was at the beginning. I was starting to, as soon as we said we were going to talk about this, I was like, oh God, this is something I am not doing very well at. And I went into that like shame spiral around the fact that I've been thinking about this way more than I had for the last few years as a result of, everything that's shifting for me during menopause, and this feeling of it just being wildly out of my control because of my hormones just going up, going down, like seem to be all over the place. I haven't figured it out. And that's really frustrating. But now I'm feeling more self-compassion for myself. And I feel like I'm actually doing better than I think, but that there's stuff that I can work on. And all of the suggestions that you have provided today are things I'm going to take away and work on. So as always, awesome. Wonderful to chat with you, Jenn. Thanks so much.
Always great. Thanks, Wendy.
See you soon.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. Ready to create a life you don't want to escape from? Download your free Blueprint for Change now. This incredible workbook includes some of my favorite coaching tools and will help you get clear on what you need more and less of in your life. Grab it at www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint. That's www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint.